Hi, my name is Thomas and you're watching Casual DIY channel. In today's video we'll talk about resin. Stay tuned. By all accounts, I'm not an absolute expert on this matter, but we've been playing with resin for a while now, and basically I want to share with you what I've learned on my way. So this video is actually first in its series where we're going to talk about some basics about resin and how to get into working with resin. In the description of this video you'll find content about the videos that I will be posting in the next coming 9 weeks. So you can more or less know what to expect and what's coming. But if you want all that content straight away on day one, you can find it all on my Patreon page, where you can support me as a maker and at the same time get some fantastic knowledge and information. Obviously over there you can ask me more questions, and we can talk about the future videos, what you would like to learn as well. But enough of this talking, let's jump into the topic. So when I first started my adventure with resin and resin casting, I just went on Amazon, bought the first cheapest possible resin and started casting. And obviously the outcome of that was really bad. So I've wasted about 20 British pounds and basically came out with nothing. And at that point I decided, tell you what, that's not for me, that's it, end of. Fortunately enough, I'm a beast that doesn't give up that easily. So after a few months, I said to myself, okay, I'll try it again, but this time I'm actually going to do some proper research and find out what is the best resin for my needs and how to work with it. So as you can see, my table is filled with different types of resin. And to be fair, this is absolutely nothing. There are so many different types of resins that we're not going to even touch on. We're going to talk about 3 basic types and the properties, and basically I'll tell you about what I'm using and what works for me. Now my experience is based on living in the UK, which may be totally different to your country. These resins may not be available in your country, but one rule applies everywhere. Basically what you need to do is to read a technical sheet, a technical data sheet that comes with your resin, so you would know exactly how to use it and what it's for. Obviously read that before you buy the resin, because every single different project will require a different resin. Unfortunately, there isn't really one resin that fits all. There are resins that you may flex a little bit, but they will not be perfect for every single solution and every single project. So in this video we're going to be talking about the resins that actually come in part A and part B. When you mix both of them together, then a chemical process begins and the resin will set. Couple of things that we need to talk about to start with. Resins are thermosetting compounds. Basically they cure by creating a temperature between them. Obviously I'm not a chemical specialist and I'm not going to explain to you how it exactly works, but basically when you combine both of the components, the temperature of the resin will rise and that will allow it to cure over time. So what are these parts? Well, the first part is actually called the resin and the second part is the hardener. And a very important point here that we need to make, because this chemical process is based on temperature, we need to remember a couple of things when using resin and when casting with resin. The ambient temperature and the humidity in this case is actually very important. Most of the resins, most of the technical sheets that come with resins will recommend an ambient temperature between 20 to 25 Celsius. Now that is actually very important. Why? Because if your temperature is way too high, above 30 degrees in your workshop, what may not, but what may happen, it could speed up the curing process. And if you're doing a large pour, that may actually crack your resin, and your outcome will not be what you wanted. And also, if you're doing large pours, usually the resin takes a long time to cure, whereas if you speed that time because of the ambient temperature, for example, the air bubbles will be captured inside, and that's not what we want in our castings. On the other side, if the temperature is too low, the resin may not cure at all, or may be tacky and may remain tacky for forever and ever, will basically not cure correctly. So the sweet spot by most of the makers of resins is between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius. And another very important bit when we're actually casting with resin, before we start anything else, again, read the instructions, because there's a very important information there. So the mixing ratio. My first mistake when I started, epoxy on the main packaging, as it says here, 1:1 ratio. Fine, fantastic. So I'm mixing up, taking out my scales and mixing 50 grams of hardener, 50 grams of the epoxy, mixing it together, and there you go. It's actually not cured. And I'm thinking to myself, why? Why is that? Why it did not cure? Well, the answer is quite simple. All the resins have got a ratio, a part of hardener and a part of resin. Now, it's actually important to read the small print where it says 1:1 by volume or by weight. So there are two different things, and it's very important to find out what your resin is. Is it measured by volume, or is it measured by weight? Now I'm actually going to show you one of the resins I've got that will clearly show you basically what I mean. The resin I'm talking about is glass cast, and on the front it actually does tell you the mixing ratio, resin and hardener. Now it actually states by volume 100 to 50 and by weight 100 to 45. As you can see there. So that straight away gives you an indication of how you can use it. There's nothing wrong with using scales in both scenarios, if it's obviously by volume or by weight. By weight is a lot easier using scales. They actually have to be very accurate scales. For example, if you're doing really small castings, a point of a gram can make a difference. So if you're making really small castings and you're not using a lot of epoxy, I would use a very, very precise scale for that. Now, obviously with the volume, you can calculate the volume yourself and obviously translate that into weight as well. I'm not good at maths at all. So glass cast is absolutely a fantastic solution for me, because it actually does say how much I need to use. But before we're going to start talking about different types of resins, there are three terms that we need to get familiar with. So the first one is pot time. Basically, it's the time you've got after mixing both of the components to actually work with the resin. Some of the resins will have 7 minutes of open time, and others will have up to 40 or even an hour or even longer. So depending on that, you have to judge what resin will be suitable for you. The next term we need to talk about is demolding time. So basically it's the time after which the resin sets and hardens to a level when you can take it out of the mold. And the last term is called the curing time. So basically, this is the time that it takes the resin to fully cure. So, for example, the amazing clear cast, I can demold it after 24 hours or even shorter, depending on the volume of my project. Usually I do leave it for 24 hours. Now, it actually states on the technical sheet that this resin is FDA approved and can come with contact with food once fully cured. And as the technical data says, the full cure time is achieved after 7 days. Now this will vary from resin to resin, hence it's important to do your own research and find out a bit more information about the resin you're gonna buy. So with this knowledge, we can start talking about 3 types of resin I want to mention to you today. The first one is the polyester resin. Now the features of this resin, the pot time is usually counted in single minutes. The cure time also is counted from few minutes to few hours. And the cost of these resins are fairly low to a medium range. So a couple of safety features for these resins are, well, basically they can be very dangerous, they can be very toxic, and usually the smell of them is really bad. So it's widely recommended that you actually wear a respirator when you're working with those type of resins. Now the pluses of these resins, well, they cure very fast. Basically you can work with your object a lot faster. You don't have to wait a whole day or whatever. You can actually probably do your projects in the same day. And they usually cure to a very hard finish, which can be buffed and sanded to a very high shine. Another downside of these resins are that they usually are not UV light resistant. So what that means, if you manage to do a clear casting, it may actually yellow over time. Because these resins cure to very hard, when dropped onto a hard surface, they can actually shatter and split apart. So that's one of the things you have to consider. And the next resin we're going to be talking about is epoxy. I think this is the most popular and widely available. Now the pot time is usually between few minutes to up to 1 hour. The cure time of these types of resins may be from several hours to actually even several days. Now obviously the demolding time may be a lot shorter, but fully cured epoxy will take a lot longer. Now the cost of these types of resins is more or less a bit more expensive. You're looking at the mid-range to the upper range of the cost scale. When it comes to the safety and working with those resins, obviously with any resin you really need to wear gloves. The respirator is actually not necessary. These types of resins are also the best overall when it comes to the purpose of using them. They are quite flexible and you can use them for a different variety of projects. The next kind of resins are polyurethanes. So basically the pot time on these will be counted in minutes. Cure time from minutes to a couple of hours. Obviously it all depends on your product. Now the cost of these are similar to the epoxy, from the mid to the upper range of the cost scale. When it comes to safety and using them, some of them may be actually quite dangerous and quite toxic, and on some of them you will have to use a respirator to work with them. Now one of the very good features of some of these resins is that it actually may fully cure in just an hour's time. So if that's what your project requires, that's one of the resins that you may consider using. But one thing that you need to consider, they actually can be quite easily affected by the humidity levels in your surrounding, in your workshop or wherever you're going to be using them. So basically, if your humidity is high, if you live in a climate that is very humid, the resin may not cure correctly. So there you go guys, these are the 3 basic resins that you may come across when starting your adventure with resin. So the ones I've been using from my perspective living in the UK, I've got the, as I mentioned before, Alumilite Amazing Clear Cast. I've got the Royal Palm resin. I've got the Glasscast set, so I've got Glasscast 10 and Glasscast 50. And we're going to talk about all the difference between them in just a second. I've got a resin from Pro Resin, 1:1 ratio. Again, another resin from Pro Resin. Again, we'll talk about the differences in a second. And also, that's something I want to mention. I've got Cactus Juice, which is a stabilizing resin. So let's talk about a little bit about differences between all of these and why you should actually choose the right one for your project and why is it important. Now, for example, I've got over here a set of Glass Cast 10. Basically, this resin is designed to work with castings up to 10 millimeters in depth. So it's ideal for making your jewelry projects when the casting is not too deep. But I also got Glass Cast 50, and that basically means you can do pours up to 5 centimeters. And that's absolutely perfect for projects where you actually have to make a deep pour. So this resin would be a lot more suitable for making, for example, a river table, an epoxy river table. But also, the resin I don't have is Glass Cast 3, where you can do pours up to 5 millimeters in thickness. So basically you could use that resin to cover up a project, a finishing top layer. Similar to that resin, we also got the art resin from Resin Pro, which got similar features where it basically is a top coat, a really thin coat to your project. It could be used for making an art resin. Another resin from Resin Pro can work up to 2 centimeters in thickness. Again, that would be quite suitable for making pen blanks or some smaller jewelry items. Another resin that's really worth mentioning is the Royal Palm resin. Now this one is quite unique. So basically all these resins come in 2 parts, part A and part B. One is the hardener, and usually the hardener is actually quite fluid, similar to the viscosity of water, whereas the other part, the epoxy part, is usually very, very thick. When you mix them together, you will have a substance that's fairly thick, and what that means is harder to pour, and it's harder for the air bubbles to actually escape the resin itself. That's really important if you're using resin with a long curing time and you're actually not using a pressure pot or anything like that. So you are basically relying on the resin itself to get rid of the air bubbles from its side. Now the Royal Palm resin, both of the components are really fluid, very similar to viscosity of water, and that means it's a lot easier for the air bubbles to actually escape. Now I made a video talking about how you can achieve the best results with having a casting without air bubbles inside when actually not using a pressure pot or anything like that. I will link it up above. Please do check it out because it does have quite a few interesting things in it. There are also resins like for example this one that I can use for a casting of a table from Resin Pro, up to 5 centimeters in thickness, that they are self-degassing. So basically the air eventually will escape to the top, and probably just have to torch it on the top to get rid of any air bubbles that are actually on the surface of the epoxy. Now the curing time, which is very long and open, will allow for that to happen. There is one more resin I want to mention because it's very popular. So basically I've got the amazing clear cast from Alumilite, but what they also make, they make resin that's called Alumilite Clear. Now this one sets in 7 minutes. There's also a version that's called Alumilite Clear Slow, and that sets in 12 minutes. So as you can see, you've got only 7 to maybe 12 minutes of working time. So you need to mix it in 7 minutes. You need to add your colors if you're using any, mix it and pour it. Now 7 minutes is basically not enough for the air to escape the resin. So with that resin it is necessary to actually use a pressure pot. Now with regards to the pressure pot and all that business, there will be a separate video about that, so don't worry, that will be fully covered as well. But why am I mentioning this? This resin allows you to make a lot of objects very quickly because it's set so quick, and the demold time and cure time is very, very quick. And also it's a high quality resin that's used, the castings are used for making pen blanks, knife scales and all that, because the properties are actually very, very good. But saying that, also other makes that are have got the similar properties, but maybe not as popular as this one. So one thing I have to say, if you are new to working with resin and you're just starting or thinking about starting with resin, working with resin and making things out of it, I do recommend you start with epoxy resin with open time, working time between 20 to 40 minutes. Basically it will save you a lot of stress and hassle, and it will give you enough time to actually work with it. They may be a little bit more expensive, but trust me, it's worth it. And usually they don't require wearing a respirator, or because the current time is so open, so long, you don't really need any other equipment, like for example a pressure pot. So as you can see, this topic is really huge, and depending on your needs you will require a different resin. One thing that's also worth considering, depending on what resin you're using, some of the pigments and the mica powders may not be suitable for those. So again, for the 5th time or 6th time, please read the technical data sheet that comes with your resin. It's really important. I didn't do it 3 times, I think, so imagine how much money I just put to waste. Read it is really important. One thing that really needs to be mentioned, sometimes, just sometimes, despite of the fact that you got the right resin, the ambient temperature is fine, there's no other issues, the humidity is fine, you mix the correct ratios, the casting will just not come out. It's sometimes just the way it is. You can minimize that potential of happening by the steps that we're gonna follow in the next videos. So if you are interested, obviously go check out the description of the video, where I've broken down all the videos that will be coming and all the topics I will be covering, and consider subscribing to my channel. And actually, if you want to go a step forward and support my channel and you value the information I'm giving you, you can go to my Patreon page and support me directly through that, and you will gain access to all those videos straight away. But for this video, that's all guys. If you've got any questions, leave them down below in the comment section. But as I mentioned before, I am not a specialist and I'm still learning. The topic is huge, it's absolutely massive. And some of you may have fantastic knowledge that actually I may have said something incorrect. If I did, drop me a comment down below, let everybody know so we don't do that mistake in the future. But if you got any other ideas and epoxies or resins or anything like that that you want to mention that I didn't, please again drop them in the comment section. We can learn together as a community and basically make a successful casting. So guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it brought value to you, and if it did, drop me that like button below, and I hope to see you on my next epoxy adventure video. Take care.